Today we're going to look at the human eye in a lot of different perspectives and also trying to create absolute simplicity. So we have these beautiful samples from Barget, the Charles Barget books. And the first thing I want to do, I want to show you, I'm working on my sketchbook and I'm going to be working with just pencil. I'm going to be using my mechanical pencil. I always want to remind you, it's all about grip, how you grip your tool, your instrument, and how you basically come to play. Just play a little bit with graphite on paper. What I am going to do is I'm going to grab a ruler and I'm going to divide this page into 4. So I'm going to split it in the middle. And this, again, if you have your sketchbook or sketching paper, I'm just going to draw a light line down the middle and divide it vertically and then horizontally, just like that. So as you can see, I have 4 squares or 4 rectangles. And I'm going to start with image number 1 here. So what are we doing? We're looking at, in terms of drawing method, absolute simplicity. You should forget that you're drawing, I don't want to say the word, an eye. What you want to look at is lines that become shapes at different angles and the relationship between those angles. So if you look closely, you see that there's a little vertical and horizontal. Now notice that it's not in the middle. So if I have a vertical horizontal cross section here as my grid, I can then see that right at the center, there's a line. I want to make sure I capture the angle of that line. Now you don't have to start exactly where I started. You can actually pick a different area. For example, you see that maybe the combination of this line angle and this small tiny little triangle connects these two. So there is something you should be doing here, whether you use your pencil to check on your reference and bring it over to your paper to check the angle. Now you remember, if you've done this before with me, that I recommend the clock. So is this 3 o'clock, 12 o'clock, 9 o'clock? Well, is it 1 or 2 o'clock? And that is really where drawing becomes masterful. When you can pick up a diagonal and capture its angle. So here we go. There's a nice, interesting angle here. So we're looking at direction. We're looking at capturing the angle. I'm trying to keep all of my lines straighter than adding the curve. A little more straight line study than actual curves. Don't want to go too far into that area yet, where we begin to add detail. Notice that I add a top to it. We also have an angle. And I want to make sure, in order to capture proportion, whether it's a little too big for this page. And this is all the combinations that you should be thinking about in terms of when it becomes more and more a habit. And I'm talking about your drawing skills, your drawing habits. How to strategize through anything you want to draw and break it down to its simplest form. So the simplest form would be lines. Those lines come in a variation of the shapes of those lines, but mostly horizontal, vertical, diagonal, and then yes, of course, we have curves, the SC shapes. I haven't brought up negative space, but if you can capture a shape by looking at the negative space outside of it, and what does that mean? Well, I see sort of a, let's say, call this a kind of a knife. It's kind of like a dagger shape, pointy here, and it has sort of a tiny little arc. If I look this as my shape that I'm drawing, this outside space with it, which is still part of our portrait or our eye, I can read it as positive or negative space. So I want to make sure, am I capturing this shape outside of it as well? And again, it's always the relationship between this line and how it connects to this one, and the size and length of that one, and the angle in relationship to this one and this one, and how all of it just it comes together just like a puzzle. And this system of the grid allows you to check, oh, did I make this too long, too short? Am I still in proportion? Where did I go wrong, if at all? Or, ta-da, we have what starts looking like a human eye. Now today, I want to invite you to also take steps. This first one here, whether you use an eraser and clean up some of these lines that I did originally for the grid, I could use a little bit of pencil and a little bit of imagination. So from my knowledge of anatomy, I know that the cornea here, or the roundness of the eyeball, and we're going to have somewhat of a roundness and curvature of the bottom eyelid. But what I want to do is, without adding too much detail, I think this one curves down. That's what I was missing. The other edge of my eyelid. And the temptation would be to begin to add maybe a little bit of light and shade or additional details. But I want you to, at least this one, the first one, to hold it and keep it there as a reminder. And we did pretty good for this first one. So let's go to number 2. So we mentioned we're going to go to box number 2 right over here. And you notice that these lines basically just shift in terms of direction. Now, one major thing here, I have this massive lean towards the right. So my vertical should not be in the center. It should be a little bit further to the right, but not too close to the edge, right about here. If you are using the grid, and then my horizontal should not be in the middle either. It's pulling a little bit down towards the bottom. So I have this upper area with more information right about here. Notice how I'm doing this casually. I'm not using a ruler. If you feel you need to use a ruler, it's totally okay. Does it have to be absolutely vertical and horizontal perfect? The more you use this system and the more you practice it, the less in the future, the less you have to go through all these steps. You'll be eliminating steps. So what I want you to do here is hopefully not follow me exactly. Where am I going to start? Do I start out here? I tend to recommend start at the center. When you have this point that is so obvious, it's like that X that marks the treasure. If you have something here, where do I go next? Well, you could go towards the bottom right, top right, towards the top left, or to the bottom left. One of those lines, one of those shapes, all of us just see it completely differently. So I'm going to start towards the top right. And I see this little shape right there. And I'm going to go step by step so you can see this. So right there, that's the first little shape that I see. And it intersects the vertical. I hope you see that. Once I have that, I can see how it crosses that line. Excuse me. And I would want to maybe go all the way across and kind of sense that angle. The way we get the proper lengths or distance of line is according to its angle. If the angle is right, then the length is going to be right. If the angle is wrong, then it's going to be shorter or longer. So how do I know it was here? I check the angle. If I'm close, then it should be fine. I could see a little cross section right there. And I could almost just finish this area by just seeing the thickness. So the relationship between this line and this line is now what's important to me. And I see that it gets a little bit bigger towards the center as it crosses and curves, and then just has a nice tiny little angle as it fades out all the way across here. So just putting your puzzle together. Notice here, right at the center, it's almost like a figuring out all the clues. And it's your job to do that scavenger hunt. Where do I go? Where do I look next? Another negative space. Read for the outer shape. And what we start seeing in this one here is also the thickness of the skin. So one thing when you draw eyes and you have different perspectives, you're either going to see the bottom of the upper lid or the top of the lower eyelid. And that's what I want to really focus on today. How you draw the thickness of that skin to give your eyes a more realistic and much easier to get it closer to done by adding the essential information. Here I'm going again by thickness, trying to read the angle. And sometimes you have to step back, take a breath, look at it from a little distance, take a little bit of time, come back, and apply that patience that allows you to, am I making the correct read? Look at that. It lines up perfectly with the vertical, and that's where I have this other angle. And then finally we have this, the tear duct, which is just developed here with one line that has a small little angle and the corner of the eye of, the tear duct that crosses this center line. We have one more looking around. Don't forget down here we have lines that just begin at the bottom. I try to see shapes as well. When you're working with angles, the easiest shape to look for is triangles. So if you were to continue that line, this would become a nice sharp triangle here. This one here, as these two lines meet, they make another sort of triangular shape if you were to complete it. But overall, it's the easiest way for you to read angles. And then we have one final one here. I also bring up GPS. So you've never been to this place before. You type in the address and it tells you, whoop, there it is. Here's where you are. And here's where you're going. So this is the best route. So I know this point here. And I have to figure out this point here. This is the easiest way to almost connect the dots. So using that GPS system where I could measure the distance between here and here, and I measure the distance between here and here, and then I try to capture that angle and complete it. Same thing here. Where would I start my line if I don't know where I'm going? So let's kind of visualize it. Sometimes you can ghost the motion, and let's put it right down here, and then connect the dots. Now your grip here is crucial. The looser you hold that pencil, the more flexibility, the more versatility you will have with those lines. And can you imagine, can you visualize the rest of this portrait just from this eye? That is an exercise that is next level. But yes, I can. I could see a little bit of the expression. I could see where the cavity, the nose, the cheekbone would be. I see the forehead, and I see the position of the head. And pretty much you could go an entire figure just from one eye. Isn't that amazing? Perfect. So there's two. I'm going to go to number 3. There's number 3. Now, for number 3, you see this cross section Let's go ahead and draw it. This one seems to be right in the middle. So I go middle, middle, vertical, and right through the middle on the horizontal. Because we have sort of the same information, the amount of information from the center going toward the top left, top right, bottom left. Not so much bottom right, but because there is no information there. But it covers my composition, at least for this square, pretty good. So look at that. I have my center and no information there except having to connect or draw those first small shapes. And it's again like putting together a puzzle. A little bit of curve as we see it come across over the eye. Where do I see my next cross section here? It's right about here, and it comes down to somewhere right about here. So checking the angle and checking some of the break in the lines. The longer I stick with straight lines, the more adjustments I can make all the way through. Once I commit, I better be sure, because then it's when you bring that eraser and you begin to second guess and kind of lose focus, or the what I call the looseness of the mind, where you want to remember what this is all about. Ooh, this triangle is not. So here's what I said. What I meant by what I just said. There it is. Correction. Done. No problem. Going right back as I check and make that adjustment. Now I feel much, much better. So no damage. So what I was mentioning right now is don't forget what this is all about. What are we doing? Yes, we're having a little fun. We're doing a little bit of practice. We're learning how to draw. I am not the one teaching you how to draw. I'm teaching you how to learn yourself, to teach yourself how to draw. That didn't make much sense. So it's not me teaching you how to draw. It's me teaching you how you should learn by teaching yourself to draw. And you have all the systems, all the ways in which using your mental analytics, your intuition, your experience, and your artistry to put this together. I like to break it down to one just simple phrase. It's an exercise in observation. That's all we're doing here. Learning not how to look, but how to see. And what do you need to see? You need to see what's there. What's there? It's an eye. No, it isn't. Sorry. Oh, it's just a couple of lines. Yeah, you're looking and you see the lines, but I want you to see the angle and the relationships. That the combination of lines create beautiful shapes, and the arrangement, and then the gesture and versatility that you could bring, where, yeah, it's just lines, but those are Van Gogh lines, or those are Da Vinci lines. So it's that familiarity and making that. We want to make every single line yours. Making your lines yours. It's almost like if you were to write a book. You would write the book that only you could write because of your lived experience. So when it comes to lines, yeah, they're horizontal, diagonal. We see the angle, we see the shape. But I promise you, when we come to the end and we share and we look at each other's lines, we're going to see a little bit of what I'm talking about. And that's, again, my favorite part, when we share and I get to see other ideas on how to do it. So now I'm using a little more intuition. Yes, still going by the grid and how helpful it is to come across. Again, my GPS and a nice curve. This is a beautiful perspective that we rarely see, but it shows up a lot in art. You'll see paintings and you'll see sculptures, and you come up with this angle, this perspective of an eye, and now you have the capability to simplify, extract the essential lines, and eventually, I guess we could do it with the next one. Because here's where I'm almost tempted to invite you to, but not yet, to then finish it up. And how would you finish it up? Well, you're going to add the iris and the pupil and a little bit of light and shadow. But once again, I don't want to do that yet. And I see we're doing pretty good on time. So our goal today, to draw 6 eyes in 60 minutes. Let's go to number 4. Wow, okay, this one is really interesting. And again, recognizing what you see. The perspective, it's important. At some point, it's very important to, okay, I'm looking bird's eye view. I'm seeing from the top of the head and looking down at this person. I could see the top of their eye. So notice the bottom eyelid. First step, where do I put my center? I'm going to put it a little bit towards the left. That's correct. Vertical goes a little bit more towards the left, not the center. And then the center, yep, it's right in the middle. Notice sometimes how you can put this center, this vertical, horizontal. If you're working with your own subject, your own reference, you can place these lines so they line up exactly with a point that you need help with. Now, this one here, very interesting. A beautiful shape that starts right at the corner. And it's a very crucial, in order to capture this perspective here, you really want to stop, pause, and make sure you're measuring and looking at how you're reading those angles. So if you noticed, I'm not going to say this is easiest, but yeah, it's probably the easiest we did. We got a little harder, a little harder. Now this might be the hardest because we have so many. And again, it's your left brain trying to sabotage what you can see so easily if you can isolate. And that is the key. If you can isolate the information, it would be so much easier. What do you mean by isolate? Number one, forget that you're drawing an eye. You should not be thinking, see, I see a little mishap here. I'm going to catch myself early, and I may have gone too long. And again, that I have an excuse. Sometimes when you're drawing, you should not be talking. And this angle is just a little bit harder. A little bit sharper, I meant, towards the center. And then I want to make sure I have a read on this length of the center, and this is the angle. Because again, keep it straight line. Try the curves begin to make it a little harder for you to confirm your information. And then here we have thickness, and right there, what I'm looking for is this small, tiny little shape right there, and the angle of it that comes across. That piece of information right at this vertical line is what I think will allow me to put this together. Sort of like your main pieces of the puzzle. And now we go here, right about here. Checking the angle. Coming across the line, just a little bit below the horizon. So isolating information. It's kind of like how you would deal with a real problem in life. You want to simplify your solutions. Think about it in the easiest way possible. You don't want to make it worse. You want to kind of stop, breathe, think about it. Oh, okay, this is how I'll handle it. And ta-da, it turned out to be no problem at all. Easy. This is what we want to do here. Oh, it's overwhelming. Too much information. One tiny little bite at a time. And start maybe with the easiest. Find the structural, which would be over here. And your intuition will do the rest. Now, the absolute key to all of it is practice. The more you practice, look how this piece down here just brought everything together. This little moon down here. And sometimes, yeah, thinking moon or anything else that helps you simplify, isolate, and keep looseness in the mind. It's your mind that helps you or tricks you. And when you realize that, figuring out a method, a system that helps you shut it down or turn it on is key. And then these two come together right there. Now, do I really need to do this the way you're... No. Eventually, as I said, you're going to figure out ways where you're going to skip all these steps and go right to what makes perfect sense. I'm cleaning up that grid, some of these lines. And for this eye, yes, I'm going to add a little bit of graphite. I'm going to add a little bit of shadow down here. And I am going to add the iris. I am going to add a little bit of a pupil. And it should be a little bit lower than higher. So all of these things come into play here. And I'm going to add a little more material. And now it becomes a matter of how do I handle light, especially on the iris, which is, it's a whole project on its own. So I have my paper blender. I'm going to use a little bit of paper blender to just make it easier in terms of rendering. I left a little bit of highlight right there, a little bit of light at the corner of the eyes, a little bit of shadow right underneath. Where we see the ocular bone structure, a little bit of shadow coming from above. So the light source comes from above, so the shadows will be in the cavity here, and the upper and lower side here, and just under the eyebrow here. So without actual reference of how, and of course we're missing the eyelashes and the other details, but as you can see here, just like that, we can render and a very simplified version of an eye. And it kind of works. Perfect. And perfect timing. So I know I sent you, I believe I sent you 4 or 5 images. And there's a lot of practice that you can do with these. But where I want to do, and what I want to do with these and take you to the next stage is application. So what and how would I use this when presented with something like this? So we are using a marble, a bust, a sculpture as our reference because it does make it easier. So now you get to see how. I'm going to turn my page here on my sketchbook and I'm going to divide it into 2. Top and bottom here. And as we said, we're going to try to do 6 in 60 minutes. We're doing pretty good. So this first one, having the reference, if you can zoom in. I don't want you to draw the whole face. what I would love to see is, I'm just trying to zoom in into my reference. And today I'm using my phone, not my iPad. So it's a little trickier. There it is. And if you want, you could add a little bit of the forehead, maybe a little bit of the cheekbone. So up here, I'm going to start up here. Visualizing. Ooh, do I need to do the cross section? And yeah, go ahead. And how would you go about that? If you have a printout of your reference, you could grab a ruler and draw the line right over it and then set it aside to just copy that. The other way would be to, it almost starts like we did with the first one here, to visualize it. And what I did in the previous exercises is exactly what I want to do here. Simplification of the information. So I start with these lines. And I realize, oh, wow, look at that. It is exactly like we were doing in the samples before. I want to see how far you go without having to add detail. That's a good way to put this. So I see the angle. And what I really want to pay attention to is, do I see the thickness of the eyelid up here? Yes, look at it right there. As it curves and rounds right into the back of our eye. And here at the bottom, do you see the thickness of the lower eyelid? Yes, I do. And it becomes obviously a little more, what would you say, delicate. Notice there's a space, and there's a hollow space here with shadow, a cavity basically, right around, all the way around. And then simplify the information. So I want you to begin to see what you need to see. The things that actually work for your drawing. And what I usually say, by now, a 6-year-old, a kindergartner, would recognize this as, yep, it's an eye. And it's they could even say it's a sad eye or it's a happy eye. Now look at this. We don't see the tear duct, but we see a little bit of line. And what I really want to develop is this shadow here. Later on, with the little extra line, there's a little bit of shadow right in this cavity, right around the bottom lid, the thickness of the bottom lid. There it is. And just a curved line. So again, we're dealing with straight, vertical, horizontal, diagonal lines. Sometimes we come into curves. When you think of curves, what you want to do is think of convex or concave. So in order to show us the concave nature of this form, you want to make sure you got it. Or the convex. I'm going to add a little bit of shadow right under the upper eyelid. And this is just to take this a little bit further than we did before. I'm going to add a little shadow right under the brow. And also there's a little harsher contrast in the upper line at the cavity that softens out outwards. But don't forget about the shadow that curves from dark to light in the upper eyelid. That's very delicate. Yes, you could add a few lines for the hint at the eyebrow. And then I want a little bit of shadow, so a little bit of line that shows us how this is curving. Once again, is it concave, convex? So we think of a sphere, a round and how it behaves with light. Just to go a little bit further, go ahead and finish up extra shadow right here, a little bend, a wrinkle, and one more that goes outwards. In order to finish it up, I want to go a little bit further out here and add just a tad until we see the nasal bone and just the angle of the line that would guide it that way. And that's where I begin to get carried away, so that's why I stopped. I'm going to bring in my paper blender here just to soften up and give a little bit of roundness and a little bit of curvature. How some of these shadows, remember, once you start doing this, you're going to deal with values. So you don't want everything to be the same level of gray or too black or too light. You want variation so you could see which way is the light is dancing. Is it washing upward, downward? So we see the direction. And one of the best ways is to use circular motion like this. And obviously, what you don't see is the pressure. My level of pressure changes, and it's one of my favorite words to use, just caressing the paper. Giving this paper just delicious tickles, caressing it like you love it. And obviously the graphite follows, and you have total control. But it is that level of love that shows. It all depends on what style you're using. If it's more gestural and you need, some more pressure and pace, of course you would do that. Here, because of the delicacy and the way it reads, I want it just a little bit softer. I'm going to bring a little bit of that just outside here to the cheekbone. Just hinting at where the light, once again, begins to turn away. Now, you don't want to caress or rub so hard, you begin to see the paper kind of coming apart. And anatomically, I would say this begins to read great. And this is how you would continue. Same way we did the eyes. We would continue into all the other areas, the nose and the mouth. And soon we'll be doing those in a more specific way. And here is our last one. So this is going to make it 6 eyes in 60 minutes. Let me get my reference. So, extra challenge for some of you. Well, it's not just one eye, it's 2. I know some of you may go for, why not just do both? But just pick one, the left or the right. And if you haven't done it yet, this last one, you do want to just show a little bit of reading of light. So you actually see the shadow shapes. I want you to render them just a little bit. And see, I'm making my decision. Should I do one or both? Let's go ahead and do both. So the perspective, it's 3/4. It's 3/4. I need to see my diagram here where I would see the line. There it is. And once again, simplify. So simplify. I'm starting with the edge where I see a tiny bit of light here. Mark it. And as long as you can, remember, use straight lines. So I'm making a decision. We have a beautiful model here, a subject that is posing for us. How do I make the decision? How am I picking what line goes where? And why not all of the lines that I see? Well, you're going to see the lines that you think you need to see. And it could go as simple as, I'll grab this one here. The eye we all know, which is this one. The symbol of an eye with the eyelid and the eyelashes. But you want to take it a little bit further. So this is too basic. You want to take it just a few steps above that, as essential and basic as possible without it being that basic. So what does that mean to you? Because it means something different to every single one of us. And here we have this nice, beautiful curve. So remember, it's an exercise in observation. Ask yourself, what do I see? And of course, I see everything. Isolate. Simplify. And remember what we did in the previous page. Begin to see darker and lighter areas. Ooh, this is going to be interesting because we have an actual iris with the tiny little pupil in there, but it's obviously showing that it's marble. We'll put that there. We have the thickness and the light of the lower lid, and then we have the bottom side. And again, placing those lines where they need to be before I begin to add any of what generally hurts us, which is that detail, what we usually call detail. Stay away from it. Keep it simple as long as possible. There's my shadow. And I'll be coming back to that. And let's go to the other side. So here we have a nice, interesting angle. And notice that I'm going to make this just a geometric, almost a geometric form here with a little bit of a lower side. Just a couple strokes for shadow. And here we begin to deconstruct, to take apart. I'm also looking at the relationship between them. So notice that if I were to grab a ruler, look at my reference, if I place it straight, do they line up, the top lid and this one here? And they actually just touch. That's, since I didn't use my grid, that's where probably I would have used my horizontal to get a sense of how these relate to each other. Usually one is lower or higher. If it's eye level, how close. Then the distance between them, have pretty good sense of that. They actually may be a little too close here. So once again, we go back to the straight line study. The temptation to round it and want to push it too far too fast. And remember, the simple basic element of the thickness of the eyelid when you see it and how that works to better describe your eye. Lots of information back there. Need to make this a little bit, zoom in just a little bit more. There we go. Because in order to see we look at it, but do I really see it? Sometimes we have to look a lot closer in order to really see the simplicity, the angle, and how easy we could just draw the lines how they come together, the angle. And to the side of the face. And I'm going to add just a little bit of the cheekbone here, or just the side of it. There we are. So I think I have enough information there. And now I'm going to bring shadow. So notice I kept it as straight line study as possible without adding too much of the curve. I did add a little bit of material, meaning graphite, so I could do basically this, the rendering and shading, without hurting it too much. And I do want this to be, there's going to be lines that need to be a little darker, so I will revisit that. But other than that, I pretty much have everything I need right here with the lines that I put together. And then you realize how softening, rendering some of this light is actually the ultimate trick you need to develop. And that is what it is. It's tricks. Just like a magician uses tricks, we are trying to create an illusion by using lines and shapes and value, like I am doing here. We want to create the sensation of something that looks like something by just putting a bunch of lines in specific places. When you realize that, and you realize, oh, what I need to do is learn the tricks, how to use those tricks, and then, of course, practice those tricks so you get better and better at it. And the easy rendering. Remember, with love and caress. And if you have to, as I will right here, you go back and you kind of retune some of the areas, meaning adding a little extra shadow, which it needs right here. A little contrast right here. A little extra sharpness right in here. And the other solution is to bring an eraser and pull out light, which would be the opposite by subtracting, by lifting. And just a little bit of the cheekbone right over here. To me, that when drawing eyes, that kind of completes it. But once again, well underway. We have a portrait. And as promised, 6 eyes in 60 minutes. I think we should go for 10 next time. So now we go back and we look, restudy, and maybe even do them again. I hope you enjoyed this exercise. It is a lot of fun just to simplify something as complex as the eye. And where you go from here is additional practice, repeat, and add extra light. But try to look for live models, someone that can pose for you, look at different perspectives, and apply the same system. Simplify the lines, and just don't push that detail where you don't need to. Keep it as simple as possible, as long as possible, and just have fun with it. And we'll see you next time.